I'm going to let you in on a little secret, okay? I'm kind of a fan of football in the Western United States. Pretty much all of you know by now that I'm a grad of K-State, but that's not the West I'm talking about here. I'm talking about the Rocky Mountains, the Pacific Northwest, the Desert Southwest, some of the country's most beautiful places that just so happen to have a few football teams out there too. And I don't mean fan as in I cheer for these teams necessarily, I just think they're neat. Most of my dynasty teams in the past have been teams from this part of the country. UTEP, Colorado State, New Mexico State, UNLV, even Idaho back in NCAA 14 were all schools I enjoyed and still enjoy playing dynasties for in video games, so it should come as no surprise that I have a soft spot for the Mountain West. If you've at all paid attention to conference realignment over the last few years, it should come as no surprise that I'm a little worried about the Mountain West. The Pac-12's collapse, I don't care if there's still 9 teams there, they did pretty much collapse, was almost entirely due to the Super Conference movement shaking the league. And while they weren't able to pry away the Air Force and UNLV from the Mountain West yet, I do think it's coming down the pipe. Where does that leave the Mountain West? With moving Hawaii to full membership, adding non-football schools UC Davis and Grand Canyon, adding UTEP as a full member to get their first member in the state of Texas since TCU left in 2012, and bringing in Northern Illinois of all schools to be a football-only member, that leaves just San Jose State, Nevada-Reno, UNLV, New Mexico, UTEP, Hawaii, Wyoming, and Air Force as members for all sports. That's not very many. I know expansion just for expansion's sake isn't always the greatest idea for these group of 6 conferences, but I think the Mountain West now is in a very similar position to the Sun Belt Conference just over a decade ago. They need to be aggressive in expansion mode now, because teams are leaving for slightly better leagues, and we know UNLV and Air Force are pretty much on a timer before they leave. They've decided to stay put for now to get their feet out underneath them during a period of litigation between them and the Pac-12, which is necessary, but they need to be thinking about the future. I already think they missed the boat on one important member in Louisiana Tech, who will be joining the Sun Belt Conference to replace the departing Texas State here in a couple seasons. With just 9 football members and UC Davis still a few years out from being ready to join as a full member, I still think the Mountain West needs to find some ways of being stable. If they don't, I think it's entirely possible that we see UNLV or Air Force leave the conference if those financial incentives don't go far enough in comparison to some better TV deals. So I have a few proposals. Each of these proposals will focus on particular avenues of expansion, focusing on bringing schools up from the FCS, creating an eastern branch of teams, or further raiding the Mid-American Conference. It's through these thought experiments that we'll try to discover if we can save the Mountain West, or if it's already over. Let's start by laying a few ground rules. For one, let's assume up front that the Mountain West isn't confident about retaining UNLV or Air Force long term, and that it's intending on bringing UC Davis up to full membership at some point within the next 5 years or so. So, in each of these scenarios, we'll be keeping UNLV and Air Force while also adding UC Davis to the screen as a full member, with the knowledge that those 2 schools could leave at any time. That would leave Northern Illinois as the only football-only member of the league, and Grand Canyon as the only basketball-only member of the league. I'm also going to assume that none of the 4 Dakota schools would move up to join the Mountain West, whether as full members or as football-only members. They have a pretty good gig where they're at in the Missouri Valley and Summit Leagues, and I don't think the Mountain West could have enough money on the table to pry any of them away from that, unless they targeted North Dakota and South Dakota first. So none of my hypotheticals here will include any of those 4 schools. I'm also operating under the assumption that the Mountain West can only negotiate with schools that are in conferences that have smaller media deals than they do, since those schools would likely be the only ones interested in moving to that conference. For example, the American Conference's media market deal reportedly sends their teams around $7 million per year. The MAC and Sun Belt both have media deals around $2 million per team, but only the MAC has shown teams willing to look at leaving over the last few years, as the Sun Belt has built up one of the better rosters of G6 teams through realignment. While I'm sure it's possible one of Louisiana or Arkansas State could look to leave the Sun Belt to join the Mountain West, and they would absolutely both be phenomenal additions for the Mountain West, I'm not quite sure they'd really want to, considering the upswing the Sun Belt is on and the ability to stay in a region that's fairly organized geographically instead of joining a league with schools in California and Hawaii. So that leaves us with really 3 places to look for schools: the FCS, the MAC, and Conference USA. But how do we find these teams that would fit this Mountain West archetype and be willing to create this new conference? To start, I've created a spreadsheet of each of the teams that are in the Mountain West, including Northern Illinois and Grand Canyon. Well, I already have a few ideas, and to start, we're going to look at the FCS. Dipping down to the FCS, we're already at a shortage of schools compared to other conferences because there are less schools in the Western United States than there are in other places in the country due to population density. But that doesn't mean there aren't a few solid options, and the first school we're going to look at is one that's probably the most highly coveted school in the FCS right now, not named North Dakota State, and that's Tarleton State. The Texans are located in Stephenville, Texas, just a stone's throw away from the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area, which is one of the biggest areas for sports in the entire country. Maybe it's because of their location, or maybe it's due to their $28 million athletics department revenue, but the Texans are absolutely one of the fastest growing schools in college football. They just made the jump up from D2 a couple years ago and are already considered shoo-ins for the Conference USA. So it makes some sense for the Mountain West to get out in front of it and try to steal their second team in Texas before Conference USA can. Since moving to the FCS in 2021, the Texans have already made the FCS playoffs, making it to the second round in 2024. Their athletics operating budget of just over $28 million seems small until you realize that A, that's not all that bad for an FCS school that was just a D2 school a few years ago, and B, it's only $1 million less per year than what Hawaii and Northern Illinois make before they join the Mountain West. Their facilities are constantly getting upgraded, and they're the current tenants of a 24,000 capacity stadium that was recently renovated just under a decade ago. Add that to the fact that they've recently started to do really well in football, including an upset win over Army and a 61-point shutout of another FBS hopeful in North Alabama. It's no wonder that as of right now, Tarleton State is the #1 FCS target in conference realignment. If the Mountain West wants to establish a base in the biggest football state there is, and they definitely should do that, they need to beat Conference USA to the punch and add Tarleton State. So that's hypothetical ad number 1 from the FCS. There aren't that many other options out west for the conference to consider, though. While I'd personally stump for the Montana Grizzlies to make the conference shortlist, their long history as FCS contenders might not outweigh the fact that they're a small school in one of the smallest states in the country, so their value in terms of television deal incentives might not be that great. But there is a school out there in a highly populated area that would help re-solidify the conference's standing in the state of California, even if they've sort of made a fool of themselves recently. Look, Sacramento State needs to cut the dreams about the Pac-12 for a hot minute and recognize there's an opportunity for them right now with the Mountain West. Did the conference already add their crosstown rivals in UC Davis, minimizing the effect of adding another team in that same market? Yes, but despite all of that, the Hornets actually do provide a little bit more substance than their off-field buzz. Yes, the go-go offense and Coach Brennan Marion bring an almost Dion-like glitz and glamour to Sacramento State, but realignment will last a lot longer than he'll be coaching at that school, and Sac State would be added for all sports, like I'd imagine UC Davis inevitably will be. But if they can't get an invite now and got passed over for their rivals, why should they later? Well, for starters, as a Cal State system school, Sacramento State could follow the same career path that schools like San Diego State, San Jose State, and Fresno State did before them. While the football history in Sacramento is a bit lackluster, with the Hornets only becoming a football school recently under Troy Taylor and posing an all-time win percentage of 44.3%, that doesn't necessarily mean that the future won't be. The Hornets have an operating athletics budget around $43 million, which would instantly place them at 6th out of those current Mountain West members, just behind another Cal State school in San Jose State. In fact, I can imagine these 3 schools could make for a pretty solid pod scheduling-wise. And while yes, most of the recent donations and improvements to Sacramento State's athletics program have come with strings attached solely for the Pac-12 conference, the fact remains that the school and its teams have been somewhat committed to putting in the work to making FBS membership a reality. Hornet Stadium already seats 21,000 fans, and there are plans to renovate it to create an even better fan experience. No, Sacramento State isn't a better option than UC Davis, that's true. But the conference already has UC Davis, and adding their rivals would be a good way to increase their standing in the state of California and keep them afloat as an FBS conference. I can see both of these teams developing very well, to the point where they become some of the best G6 schools in the conference in terms of football success, even while sharing the same market. When Northern Illinois announced its intentions to join the Mountain West as a football-only member, there was a lot of meltdown from general college football fans about how it was sacrilegious for a school to leave the MAC. And while the outcry made sense, so too did the Huskies' decision to leave. While neutrals love midweek action, it's a not-so-well-kept secret that MAC schools themselves hate it. Students can't really make games on Wednesdays and Thursdays when they have class at 8 a.m. the next morning, and for most of these schools, their fans are Ohio State or Michigan fans first, and then fans of the school they're attending. Their fan bases are small, and midweek action somewhat handicaps their ability to grow. Does it make their games more accessible and valuable? Yes, in the short term. but it doesn't necessarily give them that much more money in the first place. Northern Illinois left for the Mountain West mostly because they were in the red as an athletics department, and the move to the Mountain West and Horizon League was a huge boost for their money. But a few months before Northern Illinois decided to make that move official, a news report came out that they weren't alone. The Mountain West was courting Toledo, too. Once you add a school in Illinois, is adding a school in one of the biggest metros in the state of Ohio really that much more far-fetched? Especially considering that Toledo was one of the most successful schools in MAC history and likely could be the school with the highest ceiling left of the remaining MAC schools, aside from Buffalo and Ohio, which we'll come back to the Bobcats later. Toledo has an average football winning percentage north of 56%, and in 10 years under current head coach Jason Candle have gone 79-44 with 2 conference titles, a 3-5 bowl record, and have yet to have a losing season. If you want to stretch it even further than that, they went 35-15 from 2011 to 2015 under their previous head coach Matt Campbell, who's now considered one of the best coaches in college football relative to his team's prestige. Their athletic department makes northward of $38 million in athletics department revenue, placing them near the top of the MAC. Toledo has become the new age version of Miami of Ohio, and they look primed to take advantage of this new momentum to lead the dead-end MAC and join the Mountain West. Now, that move hasn't happened yet for any number of reasons. The Rockets may not feel like becoming the easternmost member of a conference whose geographic center is somewhere in the Rocky Mountains, even after the addition of Northern Illinois. What could help is if they had another travel partner, one in their state of Ohio. And that's where the Bobcats come in, because you see, Ohio reportedly has wandering eyes too. In July of this past year, while realignment put the future of the MAC in danger and the Sun Belt was readying to lose Texas State to the Pac-12, Ohio reportedly entered in basic preliminary discussions with the Sun Belt Conference about becoming a member there, and the primary reason for leaving would come down to midweek action once again. While the Sun Belt would undoubtedly be a better option for Ohio, considering travel costs are also a worry, joining a 3-member pod of the Mountain West that includes Northern Illinois and Toledo would cut down on travel numbers quite a bit. And if you want to stretch even further, the Mountain West could add 2 more teams from another conference that I'll talk about later to cut down on those travel costs even more. The Bobcats earned about $37 million per year in athletics department revenue, similar to Toledo, and their football program has an all-time win percentage just north of 50%. But, like Toledo and Northern Illinois, I'm imagining that Ohio would only join the league as a football-only member, joining another conference as a non-football member like Northern Illinois to cut down on costs. That would give the conference 3 football-only members and just 1 non-football member in Grand Canyon. Luckily for the Mountain West, there are some other non-football members they could consider. The Pac-12 opened the floodgates to this by officially jumping and adding Gonzaga as an all-sports member. The Bulldogs don't and will not sponsor football, but have a large enough standing as a school and athletic department that the addition is still additive to the small conference. The Mountain West could do more of the same, focusing on 2 more West Coast Conference members that could strengthen their athletics acumen, especially in basketball. The white whale would obviously be St. Mary's. The Gales, located in the Bay Area town of Moraga, California, are the preeminent basketball dynasty left in the West Coast Conference after the departure of Gonzaga. And while Gonzaga has dominated the conference as of late, St. Mary's is still a very good college basketball brand, especially out west, winning the regular season West Coast Conference title 6 times in the last 15 years and making the NCAA tournament 4 out of the last 5 years. Earlier this year, St. Mary's president Roger Thompson made it clear that they'd be hugely interested in leaving for the Pac-12. And while I do think that conference is their likely destination, it'd be malpractice for the Mountain West not to at least toss them a phone call to measure interest. Another school I think they should call is a former West Coast powerhouse in their own right, and that's fellow West Coast Conference member San Francisco. The Dons have only made the NCAA tournament once since the start of the 2000s, a few years ago, but they also can claim something many other basketball programs even in the bigger conferences can't. They have 2 national titles, one in 1955 and 1956. The Mountain West could add them to their roster of non-power basketball title winners, joining UTEP and UNLV. While their star has definitely lost its luster, they're likely the only other member of the West Coast that could move the needle in terms of basketball-only additions. Now, this one will probably be looked at within the lens of some of the other ones, but I'm going to make it pretty short and sweet. Most of the Conference USA would leave for the Mountain West if given the chance. The only schools that I think might not are those in the upper or deep south. That leaves me with a few examples of schools that I think absolutely would leave to join the Mountain West. New Mexico State, Sam Houston State, Missouri State, Western Kentucky, and Middle Tennessee. Now, of those 5, Western Kentucky and Middle Tennessee are far and away the most valuable. New Mexico State doesn't really offer much more than an FCS school in terms of facilities or winning history, and they already share a market with their rival UTEP. Add that to the shaky recent history with New Mexico, and while I think they might be a culture fit for the Mountain West, they might not be the smart move at this time. Sam Houston and Missouri State might as well still be FCS schools, but they do have some strong points. In terms of geography, Sam Houston, located on the eastern side of the state of Texas, could get the conference closer to the Houston metro, while also planting a second flag in Texas and getting another member closer to Northern Illinois. Despite that, they're still very much a building brand and seem committed to the Conference USA for the short term. The same can be said for Missouri State, who, like Sam Houston, plays in a smallish stadium of around 14,000 seats. While the Bears would also provide a travel partner for Northern Illinois and put a second team in the Midwest, they don't have the football pedigree that Sam Houston does. They have an all-time win percentage hovering around 48%, and their last conference title came in 2020 under Bobby Petrino. They've never won an FCS title. Cut to the Hilltoppers and Blue Raiders, who famously were set to join the MAC back in the Conference USA's meltdown a few years ago, but backed out last second due to hesitance on the part of MTSU brass. Western Kentucky has made it very apparent that they aren't happy with the Conference USA and would like to be literally anywhere else, but with the MAC's re-edition of UMass, they don't look to be considered there anymore. Their name's been brought up a few times in connections to the Sun Belt, but again, the addition of Louisiana Tech there makes it seem less likely of an addition. Enter the Mountain West. Western Kentucky is located in Bowling Green, a nearly 7-hour drive away from Northern Illinois' campus. While that's a significant distance, it's far closer than Northern Illinois' other conference mates in the Mountain West, since they're about 13.5 hours away from Wyoming and 15.5 hours away from the Air Force. Adding Western Kentucky would give Northern Illinois a conference mate that fans could reasonably drive to. And yes, 7 hours is a reasonable drive for college football fans in the Midwest. Aside from locational factors, though, Western Kentucky also brings a few other positives to the Mountain West. The Hilltoppers have an all-time winning percentage of just under 60%, with a rich coaching history that includes Jack Harbaugh, Jeff Brom, and Bobby Petrino on the sidelines. The current team, led by 7th-year head coach Tyson Helton, is consistently one of the Conference USA's best squads, and has been since they joined the conference in 2014. The Hilltoppers also make about $45 million in their athletic department already, which, ignoring the bump they'd receive from Mountain West membership, would place them in front of San Jose State in terms of revenue. The Raiders, while not as successful as the Tops, do also bring a few positives to the table. With an all-time win percentage above 56%, a long history as one of the Ohio Valley's top football programs in the past, and a 27,000-capacity stadium, MTSU looks the part of a program in the new Mountain West profile, even as the easternmost member. They also have an athletics department revenue of a surprising $52.5 million, according to Knight Newhouse, which, ignoring the bump in revenue, slots them right behind Nevada. If all sports is uncomfortable with them, then they could follow the NIU route and join as football-only members, though I would caution the Mountain West on adding too many one-sport members at this point, which could lead to a Big East-style split later down the line. Now, would either of these two schools leave for the Mountain West instead of staying in Conference USA? I don't know. Well, for starters, there aren't exactly a lot of great moves available for the Mountain West to play. There certainly aren't any more no-brainers after the addition of UC Davis, other than maybe to start pushing on Tarleton State as soon as the money situation of the conference gets sorted out. If I were an advisor to Gloria Nevarez, the current commissioner of the Mountain West, I'd recommend she put numbers and logistics people on any of the schools in these three plans. Any combination could work, or it couldn't, depending on how all sorts of things work out. But if I were in her shoes and I didn't have to deal with the massive headache that is the ongoing courtroom war between the Mountain West and Pac-12, here's what I'd do. For starters, from the numbers that I've run, we know the average Mountain West team right now that we're looking for a school that can have around $30 million in athletics department revenue with at least 18,000 in average attendance after joining. Basically, we're looking for a school with more than those 111 points. Right up front, we know that the two FCS teams at the top of our list, Sacramento State and Tarleton State, fit that bill, as well as both teams having top 20 markets. But Tarleton State and Sacramento State aren't the most valuable schools out there. In fact, if the conference wanted to up the ante, we know that Western Kentucky and Toledo are actually the two most valuable schools left on this list, and by my criteria, are actually more valuable than the majority of the remaining Mountain West Conference members. Here's my arbitrary final score metric, by the way. Yes, it's imperfect, but it makes sense as a rough determinant of value to me. So if I'm the Mountain West, I'm adding Sac State and Tarleton State and trying to add one of those West Coast Conference schools, and if that doesn't work, then I'm trying to see if I can get any two of Toledo, Ohio, Western Kentucky, or Middle Tennessee to be football-only members. Schools that scored under that average of 111 points are schools I don't think are good targets for this moment for the Mountain West. Montana, Montana State, Stephen F. Austin, New Mexico State, Sam Houston, and Missouri State, among some other schools that are on here that I haven't gone into detail on. Now, there is an anomaly here that we have to address, and that is that by my own formula, Wyoming, a founding member of the Mountain West, is the second least valuable school on this entire page. We all know that's not true, but what's probably happening is a really big overvaluation of their market. Laramie is a small city in a minuscule state, to the point where honestly the most entertaining thing to do in Wyoming is literally go watch some cowboy sports. And that might be a good thing, that might not be. I think the Cowboys are a lot more valuable than that, but I also think the numbers work for the other schools on this list, so we'll just check an asterisk on them and take the rest of the numbers with a grain of salt. So if the Mountain West absolutely had to expand, this is what I'd tell them to do. It's a bit of a sprawling empire, and a broken one at that, but I do think it would keep them afloat as an FBS Division I conference for the future. But then again, we're at an age where a conference doesn't exactly need 12 members to stay afloat at all. The money just needs to work out, and the programs have to stay competitive with each other. For schools like Hawaii, UTEP, and UC Davis, I think the move to the Mountain West is one of the better things to happen to their athletics departments in their histories, and I think it would rank similarly for schools like Sacramento State and Tarleton State. But what do you guys think? Is the Mountain West doing the right thing by waiting all their finances out, or should they get on their horse and try and bring in Tarleton and Sacramento State? Would a move to the Mountain West by Toledo, Ohio, Western Kentucky, or Middle Tennessee also work for them? Will the madness ever end? Probably not.